Anyway, she says songs poured out from the pit of my heart in bowels, as if they'd been waiting there for years, screaming to be heard. Titles, lyrics, and melodies came to me effortlessly and filled up notebooks, scraps of paper, and even napkins. Napkins, you guys. Because that's when you know somebody's a true artist, when they can't stop drawing on the napkins. Also, you should know that these songs did not just come from her heart, but also her bowels. And if you need to test that out, you should listen to some of that music, because you can really sense the diarrhea. Hey, how are you? Welcome to my channel. Today we are finishing Worthy. I'm not spending another second on this book, not even. We're only in part 3. I misspoke last time. It's not 3 parts, it's 4. I'm not slogging through all of this and giving every word in this book the care and attention that I have bothered with other books, because this book is boring. Boring. It goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on about stuff that you just don't care about. And I'll tell you why. Because Jaden wasn't ready to write an honest memoir. At all. So a person who writes a memoir and isn't ready and willing to speak explicitly about their own motivation, to speak explicitly about the difficulty they had with other people in their lives, that's going to be a boring book. So then we end up getting long passages about all her friends in the Be More streets, long passages about her grandmother's garden, long passages about random encounters with celebrities, but none of the encounters are interesting. It's like, then I, spoke to him at a party and he said he liked to drink water. Then I spoke to this other person and we went and rode dirt bikes and I fell off the dirt bike, but then he said I didn't have to get up again, but I said I would. It's like, okay, it's like just it's all so boring. And this is the thing that's shocking. This book should have been incredibly interesting. If we take what she said and the upbringing that she had, growing up with a heroin addicted mother, thrown into a life of extreme independence on the streets because there was no adults who seemed to want to take care of her. Then cast into Hollywood, her star rose incredibly fast. She's friends with extremely instrumental people, Tupac, in the R&B world. She has all of these experiences at a very young age. This book should have been just like a page turner, like I can't put it down kind of book. But it wasn't, and it wasn't because she wasn't ready to write it. If you grow up with a mother addicted to heroin, that's going to leave its imprint on you. And if you want to tell us that story, please do. But if you want to tell me a story in which you gloss over the fact that you were neglected for the majority of your growing up years by a mother who only was going after that heroin hit, then you suddenly want to write about her as this moral beacon in your life who sort of steered you clear when it came to boys, like, sorry, Tupac can't spend the night. Tupac can't spend the night because he's a boy and I don't like you to have boys sleeping in the house with you. Oh, you can't talk to Will Smith because he's married and we don't talk to married men. Like, the only time she talks about her mom is in this sort of faux maternal way, and we know her mother was not maternal. How could she have been? She was an addict. And, I'm not throwing a mom under the bus. She had her struggles. But Jada, don't tell us about your mom if you aren't willing to tell us about your mom, And if you weren't ready to write that book, honestly, that's okay. Maybe you'll be ready later. Or maybe you'll never be ready to write the honest book. Maybe for you it would feel disrespectful to speak about your mother that way when you knew that she was struggling. That's okay too. But don't come to us with how many pages is in this sorry book? 405 page book about your life. And it's just boring drivel, just so you can say that you wrote this book, the searing memoir about how you came to understand how you're worthy. You didn't. You didn't, because every single story is you being the heroine, even back when you say you weren't worthy. There's an overlay on this whole book in which people are wilding out, and she digs deep and might have been a little bit crazy at first, but in the end she wraps it up in a pretty bow in which she takes the high road. Always, every single encounter. And then whenever you know that there was like egregious struggle, she sort of pays homage to it by being like, there's a lot to it, but I can't get into it right now. Then don't write a book. Don't write a book. If there's a lot to get into, that's why we would be reading it. It's not so you can be like, well, we'll slap somebody, but there's a lot to get into and, it's just like the story's too long for right now. Well, you just spent 400 pages telling us about nothing. Nothing to you. How in the world at this point can you tell me, well, there's just a lot, I can't get into it? You didn't mind telling me about every friend you ever had on the Be More streets. You didn't mind telling me about all the roses in grandmother's garden. You didn't mind telling me what snacks Grandma Shirley liked. I mean, what are you talking about? You can't get into it. How about you cut some of the trash out of the book and get into the stuff we really wanted to hear? But no, because she wasn't ready to write a memoir. So we're going to go through the end of this, right? We're going to hit the high notes, and then I'm closing this book up, okay? This has been a waste of my time. This has been a waste of your time. And, you know, I got some things to say about the end of this book. I got some things to say about the way she says she parented her kids. I got some things to say about the way she and Will function in their relationship. I got some things to say about what she's offered us. I'll make my commentary. But a greater waste of my time I have never known. And by extension, a greater waste of yours. But I promise that I will make this last bit worth your while. You've been with me this long, and I will not abandon you now. But I'm just going to say, I read 3 chapters super carefully, and when we got to the part where she was in a heavy metal band, I was just like, all right, I'm closing up shop here. This is just some trash. Okay, chapter 14 is where we'll start. She entitles that chapter Little Gurus. Who might that be? Oh, just the fruit of her own loins. I don't understand why she lets her children run the show like she does. Doesn't make any sense to me. Like, why would you do this? They are innocents. They just showed up here. They are being included into your world. You're not being included into theirs, right? So why do you put the enormous pressure on their shoulders? You slap them in the driver's seat and say, could you drive mommy around? Because she doesn't have a clue. She's constantly learning these lessons from her children. But what I think is like, are those lessons, or are you just so desperately feeling around for somebody to tell you what to do that you're willing to let the poor infants take over? That's too much for them. And by giving them all of this authority in your life, how can you ever steer them clear when you see them going off the rails? You've already told them you don't know what to do. You've already told them from a young age, y'all are smarter than mama. Somehow you came into this world. She definitely ascribes to the philosophy that children are innocents, that know everything, and that, you know, the world is what corrupts them into confusion. If we just look at the children always, you know, children are just so honest. Children are just so well-meaning. Well, I mean, I've seen a toddler bite somebody and bash them about the head. The child had never seen 2 grown-ups bite each other, but this child decided, I'm gonna go bite that other kid. Okay, well, where's the innocence, the joy, the well-meaning soul in that scenario, right? But Jada would have you believe that children, just watch closely and they'll tell you how to be a grown-up. We start off by her talking about how she sort of entered motherhood. And of course, Will already had a child, Trey. And so she quickly becomes a mother. But that came along with the territory of figuring out how she and Cherie, the boy's mother, were going to get along. Now, Will had a good relationship with Cherie, good enough that they spoke often. They were not interested in having a grotesque divorce in which Trey suffered because of their selfishness. And so, by extension, Jada was going to have to learn how to get along well with Cherie because that's what Will wanted. And Jada keeps telling us, yeah, for Trey's sake, I just really wanted to get along with Cherie. I mean, I wouldn't bother if it weren't for Trey. And I mean, that's fair. You wouldn't bother to have a relationship with your husband's ex-wife if there wasn't a child involved. But this whole passage bothers me because it's like I said earlier. She constantly talks about how wretched it was between them. Like, it was so hard. I mean, we definitely did not want to spend holidays together. I mean, there were years when we just like, I'm just going to tell you right now, girl, it was crazy how much we disliked each other. But for the sake of the boy, we came together. And I'm so glad we did because I learned that love is a choice. Well, that is a good statement. Oftentimes love is a choice. When we have people in our lives who are difficult, even in your own marriage, sometimes you go through seasons where you have to choose to act in a loving way because, you know, the other person's driving you crazy or whatever. And she says that's something that she learned from Cherie. Well, that's great. Good for her. But she goes on to talk about the fact that Trey was her first little guru. Trey, she says, had this habit of giving away all of his things to his friends. So she says that she and Cherie and Will really wanted this little boy to have all the things they hadn't had growing up. One of those things was a closet full of pristine sneakers. Well, one day when Trey's over at her house, he has a little friend over playing. The friend says, Trey, you got a lot of nice sneakers. Trey's over there tinkering with his Legos and like, yeah, you can have them. And Jada is walking past, and Jada says, she pulls Trey out of the room, and she's like, Trey, those are your things. You don't need to give your things away. And he's like, but I don't want them, and he does. So he can have them. And, Jada looks at this like, this is the most profound thing she's ever encountered. How could this child at such a young age be this minimalist who understands that things can tether you, and you just release them, do not keep them, and she says, as a child who had struggled with a lot of want in her life, she found herself doing things like buying every single kind of cereal in the cereal aisle because she just liked to see it in her cupboard. But Trey was the sort of child who could just let it all go. Okay, well, but that's because Trey is the child of a mega movie star who has never, known want. You can't really compare the way Trey looks at things with the way you look at things. And an overall point is that Trey understood things. He doesn't understand the value of things. He doesn't understand. He doesn't have like a greater understanding than you. He just has experienced life differently than you. And what is the sin if you want every kind of cereal? Why can't you just have every kind of cereal? Like, you don't have to you don't have to chastise yourself and go wear a hair shirt over it because you enjoyed living in a situation which, as a child, you wanted those cereals, and now you can have the cereals. I understand what she's saying in that material things can begin to have a hold on you in a way that is unhealthy. But the child's giving his things away because he wants his friend to like him. I don't know that the child had this, light bulb moment in which things don't matter. I'll just give away everything. The child's not a guru. He just is like, my friend said he wants my stuff and he can have it because I want my friend to like me. And Trey was always giving his things away to such an extent that they had to come up with a rule in the house where Jada would tell Trey, these are my things, but I'm letting you borrow them. That way Trey wouldn't give them away, because Trey's whole thing was, they're my things, so I can give them away if I want to. And Jada's like, you can't argue with that. I'm like, yeah, you can. You're his mom. You bought him some shoes. He needs to wear them. What's he going to wear to school? Like, why are we giving this child so much power here? Who knows? All right, so we move on. Trey, a little guru, a little minimalist guru, but a new guru is about to enter the picture. So you will recall that at this point in the story, Jada is pregnant. She gives birth to this child. Let me tell you, so many pages were expended on telling us all about the harrowing pregnancy and then the birth story, but none of it was interesting. The whole thing read like a mom who has been given a baby book journal and feels like she should start filling it out for, her child, because she believes her child's really going to want to read this one day. And she starts writing about her birth story for her child. But, after the birth story, she kind of stops filling it out because she bored herself even talking about, and then I got really heavy because of the water weight, and you were just so big, and I was just so uncomfortable, and I was just begging you to please come out. Like, boring. Horrifically boring. It truly felt like reading somebody's baby book. All right, so Jaden comes out. By the way, she wanted to name him Sire, but Will Smith was like, that's a stupid name. We're not doing that. But then he said, after he watched Jada give birth to Jaden, that he wanted to name the child after Jada because he was so amazed by the entire birthing moment. And, somebody got to get the obligatory passages about how she felt so unworthy that her child should take her name. And then we have some more self-deprecation about how unworthy she is for her son to take her name and all this. Whatever. Then we talk about the fact that Jaden was a soul who was as crystal clear as the frozen water of the north. The most self-determined little soul that you have ever heard about. And if it weren't for her being able to witness this strength of character, she just doesn't know who she'd be now. I mean, just seeing him just decide for himself how life was going to be, regardless of what the adults said, was empowering for her. And she gives us this story in which she says this is when she really began to know that this man, he could hold his own silent protests. This man in a child's body knew his own mind. She took him to a summer camp. Sort of like a day camp thing. It was like a week-long camp, sort of a daycare sort of thing. It was only half a day. And she puts him in the car, and he had not had any formal school at this point. He's like a toddler. She puts him in the car, they drive to the place. And he says to her when they're getting out, "Mommy, why are you putting me with people who don't love me?" And she's like, what a profound question. Yes, why did my parents put me in things like ballet, where the teacher put me in a black tutu and in the corner? Why did they put me in institutions where when I was bullied, no one would listen to me? Immediately, she's like, oh no, is he gonna have the same experiences? What if people don't love him? And you start to think, oh, is this gonna be the precursor to a really terrible story? You know, where he called it and then she didn't listen, and then he's hurt by somebody at that institution. So you're sort of holding your breath like, oh, I really hate to hear about a kid getting hurt. Well, she tells him, hey, look, listen, I'm going to sit in this parking lot all morning, and you go in, and I'm not leaving. So he sort of like makes his peace. So he sort of makes his peace with it, like, okay, that's a deal I can strike. So he goes in reluctantly, reticent to join the group. And she comes and she picks him up about 5 minutes early every day of that week. She sits outside in the parking lot every day. It's almost like, why are you even bothering to bring him here? Because like, I don't understand how this busy movie making person has the time to put their child in a program and then just goes and sits in the parking lot. Like, you might as well just interact with your own kid that morning, but whatever. I guess she has the bandwidth in her schedule to just waste a whole week sitting in a parking lot. But she goes in, and every time she goes in, he's sitting at the door with his backpack on, like he's ready to go. At the end of the week, you know, so you think, you're like, man, what's going on here? You know, at the end of the week, the teacher comes to Jada and says, we have so enjoyed him. He's really a kind boy. He's gentle and sweet, but he hasn't really interacted with anybody all week long. And the other children really want to play with him, but he hasn't really wanted to join the group. And Jada says she just like listens politely to this lady who is critiquing her son's experience and the way he interacted. She listens politely. And then the instructor says, we would love for him to come to the closing picnic. You know, would you all be interested in coming to that? And so Jada agrees to come. And she says when they get to the picnic, they find a bench that she and he can sit on, and they just sit on the bench the whole time. Other kids come up and want to play with him, and he smiles, but he's like, no, I'm going to stay here with my mom. And he won't interact with anybody. And Jada's like, look at my little man holding his silent protest. He told me he didn't want to go to this. He told me he already had friends and didn't need more. And I put him in a position where he had to hold this silent protest against what I said. He wasn't rude about it. He wasn't kicking and screaming about it. But I saw then that institutional situations, you know, I wasn't going to leave him. I wasn't going to leave him at another institution after I saw his silent protest. Your kid was rude. Your kid was rude. You brought him to a thing, which presumably was a good activity. You probably did your research to make sure that this was worth his time. And then he didn't have the decency, and you didn't insist on the decency of mixing with other people who are asking him questions, who want to get to know him. You just pulled him out of that situation because, well, he was holding a silent protest and I honored it. You know, and she says from that day forward, he never went to any kind of school again. She homeschooled him from that day forward because she saw that these kinds of environments were not for him. I'm not against homeschooling. In fact, for many numbers of years of my childhood, I was homeschooled. I'm not against homeschooling at all. But this is bogus that he went to a half-day daycare as a toddler, didn't want to interact, and then you pulled him from that experience and decided that he had told you all he needed to know about his schooling from then on. What? The child is constantly being ensconced by adults. He's constantly hanging out with the adults on film sets, as we're going to see when she decides to start touring with her heavy metal group, Wicked Wisdom. Jaden's coming along on the tours all over the world. Like, he's not with kids ever. And he's essentially been told, you don't need to waste your time trying to get to know other people like you. And he has this great disdain for other kids his age. Like, I've heard him in interviews talk about, like, oh, they're so stupid. They never want to talk about anything like the world economic situation. It's like, oh, please, Jaden, you are so annoying. You know, and he's just one of those kids who spent so much time with adults who've told him that he's precocious and clever and just, you know, a 10 out of 10 human being who has no flaws, that he just is annoyed and sort of disgusted by people his own age. Look, here's the thing. Maybe some of the people his age are boneheaded, probably. But he's been told his whole life that if he doesn't want to do a thing, he doesn't have to. And that's just a recipe for creating people who are incredibly self-centered, you know? But he'd held his silent protest. And him not talking to the other kids wasn't rude at all. It was just him knowing himself. And she learned a lesson from that. You know, she learned a lesson in that, you know, she needed to honor this quiet, gentle soul who told her without words how it was going to be. Then she has another kid, Willow. So we get one more story in which Jada all but hands over all authority to young Jaden. And as I'm reading the story, I just am like, my alarm bells as far as like BS are going off, because I'm like, what experience is this that she's describing? She says that she took the little kids to the zoo. They go to the zoo and they see some kangaroos. The kangaroos apparently were given Cheerios to eat, but it's not immediately clear who was to give the Cheerios. Was it the zookeeper? Because I have never seen in all my born days a zoo in which children were allowed to meander amongst the kangaroos. Kangaroos can be some vicious animals. They kick the daylights out of a little kid. I've been to many zoos. I have 3 kids. We've traveled the world, and you can't do a whole lot with 3 kids, but you can go to the zoo everywhere, right? They're always going to enjoy the zoo. And I have to tell you right now, never once have I seen a zoo in which you were allowed to go in and feed kangaroos Cheerios. But Jade is going to a different zoo, and maybe if you're a celebrity, they let you. She's strolling by, she sees the kangaroos, she sees a bucket of Cheerios, and she tells Willow wants to go in and feed the kangaroos. Willow loves animals, so she lets her. Go over there. There's some Cheerios. Go feed the kangaroos. Do you know anything about animals at all, Jada? You know, I mean, what is this? Then she tries to get Jaden to get out of the stroller and also go feed the kangaroos. And he's holding another one of those silent protests. And he looked up at me, she says, and pointed at the long claws on the kangaroo and said, "Do you see his long nails, Mommy?" I looked down and saw that the kangaroo had some razor-sharp toenails. I chuckled at Jaden's polite way of saying, "Hell no, and why would you let Willow run around stealing their Cheerios?" Good looking out, Jaden. I scooped Willow up, put her in the stroller with Jaden, and we rolled out. Why did she need the wisdom of a child in that scenario? Was she this bereft of reason that she would let her child wander about with animals that have no sense of loyalty to her and that could have just like kicked the life out of her? And she needs the boy in the stroller to be like, "The nails on those animals are rather long, Mother." You know? And then she's like, "Oh yeah, probably shouldn't be letting the baby feed them." The whole story was just like, what? You know? Then the other thing that's just like, what in the world is going on in this book? Is she wants to talk all about the way she and Will did like sleeping routines with the kids. So for her, it was like really important that they co-sleep. Okay, I mean, you can really fall down the rabbit holes on some Facebook parenting groups about co-sleeping, all right? I'm not here to tell you what you can and can't do, but what I'm telling you is you and your husband are going to have a way better time if your bed is your own and you don't have like a pack of kids in there every night. You know, it is a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad night's sleep when you, your husband, and a pack of kids. So she is okay with Jaden and Willow getting into bed with them at any point. Will's like, "Hey, could we maybe not do this every night? I mean, I want to be able to come and sleep in my bed, and I want to sleep in my bed with you and not all these kids." Well, she's like, "No, the children must know that they can be with us." You know, and it's like, Will is like, as soon as she had those kids, Will hit the back burner. And I'm just here to say that if you think that your marriage is going to be able to rise above your husband always being an afterthought, you better think again. And that's not because your husband is a self-centered individual. It's because you and he need to be like this in order for that relationship to work, for your kids, for the family. Like, you have to be on team each other first. And then out of the overflow of that, you can take care of your kids. But if it's always mommy and the kids and then dad's kind of like this sad afterthought, good luck with that marriage. So she then goes ahead and like makes this like other bed for them, you know, and she like has this bed built for her and Will, and it's like, you know, it's got this canopy with these twinkle lights and everything, and she's like, this is gonna be our little love nest. But no, the kids invade that space too. And so he, you know, and then at one point he's like, I'm done with this, and he takes the kids out of the bed. He's like, y'all are gonna go sleep in your own beds. They're old enough to talk and walk and stuff like this. It's not like, you know, you're not in the throes of like new baby where you're like, you fell asleep in the bed breastfeeding the baby. Like, these kids are toddlers, they're thrashing, they're rolling over, they're snoring, they're, you know, hitting you in the head with their limbs all night. This is not like a cozy little kumbaya, you know, and he's over it. Y'all need to go to bed. Y'all have rooms and beds of your own. Y'all need to go to bed. Jada's wringing her hands. She doesn't know how this is all going to come together, you know, I'm worried about the kid, yeah, you know, but Will puts his foot down for like once. He's very just, to hear her tell the tale, he is very unpresent as a dad, as a husband. Like, work always comes first, and then if he has time, he hangs out with them, but he's always promoting something. He's always away. She doesn't really complain about it. It just seems like his family is a accoutrement to his lifestyle. Like, he likes to be a family man. He likes the idea of that, but he doesn't really seem like he's around a lot. So when he decides to rise up and have his say, I don't think it goes over very well, because it's mostly her and the kids doing whatever, and then he like flits in and out. So it didn't really go over well when he says, he picks up the kids and brings them to their own bed. They're angry, they're fussing, they're fighting, they're crying, but he's like, it's over. In the morning, she wakes up to find that her kids have fallen asleep right outside their bedroom door. And she's like, that's it. They held their silent protest. She's real big on the silent protests. That's it. They held their silent protest. It was back in the bed. I wasn't willing to do this kind of damage to their soul, you know. And then she tries to tell you that, like, on their own, they eventually went to their own bed. Yeah, like, when it's, like, way past the point when they should have been in their bed ages ago, and you and Will, your relationship is just, like, you know, circling the drain. You know, it's unbelievable. And what's even crazier is that she goes on to tell about this story in which she says that it was like 1999. Will had been invited to DC to host the big, you know, New Year's party. He was going to be like the, I don't know, MC or something. And they were invited to spend the night at the White House. And he really wanted to do this. And she was like super overwhelmed by the idea of it, because they were coming right off of their Christmas trip to Aspen, which was always this 40-person event. Because that's the other thing that's going on in her life. You know, she's got this, you know, these two little kids, but then also it's kind of fallen on her shoulders to be the help to every single person in their family, extended friends, extended family. They're always calling Will and Jada. You know, they know Will and Jada have money, and so they're constantly having to solve problems. So-and-so's in prison, so-and-so needs bail money, so-and-so needs a lawyer. But then on top of that, every time they go and have a family trip, they feel that they need to invite all of their extended family and friends to join them on these family trips. And it's on Jada's shoulders to arrange this stuff. So she's overwhelmed. I mean, she's maxed out. So they go to Aspen, one of these 40 people trips, this 40-person trip that she's arranged. Then right on the heels of that, they've got to go to DC because he's supposed to MC this event. And he's insistent that they go because he says, hey, this is going to be a great opportunity for me, but also we get to spend the night in Abraham Lincoln's room. Okay, you guys, I don't know a lot about a lot. I do know that the president has a guest house where people stay. Now, maybe there are people who are given that experience to sleep in Abraham Lincoln's bedroom. I'm sure there are, but a family of 4 is given one bed to sleep in. This is what we're told. And that the horrific events of the previous nights of their entire parenting relationship, in which all the children are up in the bed with them, is repeated, except this time in Abraham Lincoln's bedroom. This time they're thrashing around in that dusty bed with Will, Jada, Jaden, and Willow all trying to make their peace under the Emancipation Proclamation all night long. You guys, why in the world would the White House invite a mega celebrity and his wife and kids to go spend the night in a bedroom with one bed? I don't buy that story, but all right. So onward and upward. As Willow gets older, Willow enjoys arguing with her mother and snakes. So we get a lot of stories about that. Jada wants you to know that Willow was extremely emotional, but like in the best sense of the word, you know. She just had huge feelings that, I mean, and she is a person who knows her mind. She is a strong-willed, big emotion young lady, and there's just nothing wrong with that, ever, you know. And if there ever was something that came up that was like not, you know, maybe your favorite sort of scenario, it was really Jada's fault. You know, Jada wants you to know that she just handled things really bad with Willow a lot. And it was never because Willow was wilding out, ever. You know, she was being true to herself. And Jada needed to respond better to that. And so if there was ever a falling out or ever hurt feelings or anything like that, it wasn't Willow, who had never been parented or ever shown a positive way to interact with human beings. It's because Jada didn't do the right thing. Now, okay, all sarcasm aside, Jada says that Willow had big feelings about a lot of things and that her reaction often was to tell Willow, stop crying like that. Like, nobody wants to see you like pitching a fit like this. Go to your room. You know, if you gotta cry like that, go cry somewhere else because I don't want to see it. And she says that Willow often felt like she was not validated in her emotions. And I don't know how Jada said, go off and cry by yourself. And I don't know what kind of fit Willow was having. You know, was it legitimate, like, cry for help, mom, like, listen to me, I'm trying to say something? Or was she just pitching a big old baby fit and her mom's like, not here? You know, and so we don't get any context for how that happened. We just get a whole lot of mom guilt from Jada, thinking that her child hung the moon and could never have done anything wrong and she should have recognized that in the moment. I cannot even sit here for that, okay? Children do not know what they do not know, and you gotta help them. You gotta help them with their big emotions. Yes, they have big emotions, right? You know, they either have huge emotions or they aren't telling you anything because they don't know how to express those emotions. Either way, as a parent, it's your job to help your child figure out how to sort of curtail the crazy or to talk about what's hard for them. But you have to know your children. You have to be a steward of your child to figure out, how can I help this child better walk through the world? Right? That's your job as a parent. Not to say, I usurp my position to these young children who just came out of the womb. I'm going to slap them in the driver's seat and tell them to just go, go, go. And then I'm just a passenger here. Can you imagine the weight and worry of it? Children need to have structure. They need to have grown-ups who like tell them which way to go. You know, children want to be told what to do. And oftentimes when they're rebelling, it's because they're begging you to just stop them. Somebody come into my life and tell me what to do. You know, so if they're wilding out consistently, it could be because you aren't helping them at all and they're begging you through their overreactions to stop them, to help them, to show them the way. Anyway, no, they're all gurus. So just note that. The next chapter, we talk all about how Will is the problem. Will's the problem because he's the megastar and she's over here and she's just swallowed the key, as she would say, to her own gilded cage. Now, I don't know what that metaphor means, except for the fact that she wants to talk a lot about how she had created a world in which she was a celebrity in her own right. Then Will showed up and everybody loved Will, but nobody loved her as much. And of course, she did sort of take a hiatus from things because she'd had a baby and then another baby, and she's over here trying to help the household as they help every single person they ever knew. Now that they're rich and famous, they feel like it's their burden to help everyone they've ever known. And you have to wonder how many times they were manipulated by family members, like, well, now you got some, so now you got to help me type of situation, type of attitude. I'm not saying they can't help people if they don't, you know, help people if you want to, but I wonder how many times they help people out of pure guilt and less out of this sense of really desiring to be a help. I don't know. They might have really enjoyed helping people. Who knows? But she wants to let you know that she felt like Will was supposed to save her from herself. And then when he wasn't able to do that, that was really disappointing. Now, she admits that that was a pretty broken way to think, but she doesn't ever come up with a better thing that she should have done. You know, she just does a lot of complaining about the fact that she's trapped in this relationship. And this chapter, entitled Swallowing the Key, goes on and on and on for page upon page upon page and comes to no conclusion. It doesn't even describe very many scenarios in which she is being plowed under by his star. She just keeps speaking in vague terms about how it's hard to be attached to him, and let me give you some background that's really vague and not helpful, and you know, let me like set up for some scenarios. Let me just, it's generality. By the end of the chapter, I was like, what are you trying to say? Like, what's the problem? You know, but I guess in summation, his star was beginning to dim hers, and that was hard for her. Their perspectives in life were so different that they just constantly kept getting on each other's nerves. For example, now here's one concrete example she gave of their perspectives being different. One time they had gone to an amusement park, and it's been harder and harder and harder for them to move throughout the world because Will is so famous. And when they went to the amusement park with a bunch of their friends, because they can't ever just go as a family, they got to bring everybody they ever knew with them. Some group of people, they see Will and they basically mob the family, like come rushing at them. Well, that really scared Jada. You know, she's 5 feet on a good day. And Will, who's much taller, she says, was able to see that it's not that much of a threat. It's just like a small knot of people coming over and excited and want to get an autograph or shake a hand or whatever. And Jada like freaks out, starts swinging her bag, screaming, back the F up, and causes this big scene, which was really embarrassing for Will because Will felt like it was important for him as a celebrity to always maintain really good relationship with his fans, knowing that it's the fans who put him where he is. So he was really embarrassed by her behavior and felt like it was an entirely outrageous reaction to a small incident. So that really bothered him. But they couldn't come to any conclusion about that. However, where things were flipped were she didn't care about the paparazzi. Like, they didn't bother her. Like, she didn't like them to get right up in her face, but them taking her picture in general wasn't offensive to her. Whereas to Will, he found it a huge invasion of his privacy to constantly have to fight photographers. But I feel like a selfish person will never be offended by a photograph because, yeah, she wants to be photographed. She wants her pretty face to be splashed all over everything. Why would she reject more attention on herself? That's the whole problem, is that Will's getting all the attention and she isn't. So she wants pictures. She wants that to be out there. And what she dislikes was the lack of control. Like, people swarming her, she doesn't like that because she's not going to get anything out of it. And also she can't control what they're doing. But with a photographer, she can tell them, hey, back up just a little bit and I will definitely give you the picture you want. She gets something out of that interaction. Whereas Will, I don't feel like Will is as selfishly driven as she is. In the event of a fan rushing him, he gets to have this interaction with the fan. He gets to give something to the fan. He gets to, you know, fulfill their excitement, you know. But with a photographer just comes and takes something from him and he doesn't get a chance. There seems like he didn't give anything to anybody of his own volition. And it just feels like he's being robbed. But their perspective about it is just completely different. And so they come to a lot of arguments about that. And so it's like those sorts of things where they're constantly seeing the same event vastly differently and they can't get the other one on board with how they feel. That's kind of the theme of this chapter. She tells about another situation in which she just felt like Will wasn't prioritizing her safety. And she tells about a story in which she says, I don't know, she brings race up a lot. And maybe that's just because it's, I mean, I don't know if she brings it up because she really felt this way or she felt like it would make the book more tantalizing to constantly be talking about the way it feels to be a Black woman. I don't know. But she wanted to talk about the fact that they lived in a neighborhood that was mostly white. And she said that service providers who would come to their house, like pest control or, you know, the cable guy or whatever, often treated her interestingly and maybe a little bit weird, she claims, because she was Black. Like, she says they didn't know how to treat her because she was Black. Anyway, she goes on to tell about how there was this pest control guy who they worked with like numerous times before, and he and she had a great rapport. So I guess he wasn't one of the racists. But when she told him, hey, our problem's under control, so we probably won't be needing your services anymore, he flew into a rage and busted into the house and was like, "You're going to pay me right now." And she's like, "You've always billed us. Just bill us again like you usually do." He's like, "No, I want cash right now." And like comes into the house, and she says she felt threatened. So she grabbed the top of the blender, the solid glass top of the blender, and she like, raises it above her head. And she's like, "You better get the F out of my house right now." And she, he collects his things and leaves. So she calls Will, and Will's like on set. And when he picks up the phone, it's clear he doesn't have time right then to get into a big conversation, but she wants him to hear her heart and like how upset she was that this man would take advantage of the fact that she's like a small woman at home alone and all this. That's how she feels. And that she feels like she was forced to threaten the man with a blender. And she wants Will to be sorry and sad about it for her and be like, "Babe, I'm really sorry that happened," and like hear her. But he doesn't really have the capacity at that moment to really make a thing of it with her. So he's like, "Sounds like you handled it," and like he lets her go. She says in retrospect, she didn't explain to him how she really felt in that moment. She says that she told him the story, but she sort of like left out how it really made her feel. And so she's like, "So it's really my fault he didn't react the way I needed him to react, but he still should have known." I'm like, first of all, the story is the worst. Boring, boring, boring. But second of all, he was right in the middle of something. Like, you cannot save in your heart the times when you felt like people were unfair to you if there were extenuating circumstances that made them react the way they did. Why didn't you bring it back up when he got home? If you desired a different response and you knew the reason he didn't give you the response was because he literally could not have that conversation with you because he's on set, maybe don't then save it for your memoir to be like, "And then there was this other time when he didn't care about my safety." It's like, girl, you're trolling for trash here. It's like, these are not good examples. And that is a theme throughout the book. These are not good examples. Okay, so that's the chapter about how it's so hard for her because he doesn't care. Then we talk about, then we've got the whole chapter. And after reading this chapter, I was like, okay, I'm done. I'm out. I don't care anymore about this book. It's book too crazy for me. And it should have been interesting because it was so crazy. And yet I've never, ever, 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 ever read anything that was so crazy and yet so boring at the same time. I didn't even know that was possible. But this is the chapter called Wild Banshee. This is where she says she was a wild woman and she needed to find an outlet for it. And if you don't know what it feels like to be a wild banshee without an outlet, then you might not understand this chapter, but she's going to explain it to you. She says that her whole life she had been exposed to tons of different genres of music, loved them all. And she lists, of course, every person she ever knew and what kind of genre of music they liked and when she heard it with them and what she felt when she heard it and blah, 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 blah. Then she gets around to the fact that even though she's Black, she really liked heavy metal music. Like, you can't do both things. And that's the thing, is she's always like making these distinctions and these revelations, like, even though I'm Black. I'm like, you're a human being. If you want to like heavy metal music, you can like heavy metal music. If you want to like Japanese anime, which she does, you don't have to be a young white man to do so. And she's just constantly like impressed and amazed by her own scope of interests, which, despite the fact that she's Black, she still had them. Okay. Good for you. Like, I'm glad you're your own individual. I'm glad that you aren't letting, culture or, other people's expectations of you limit what you're interested in. But I'm not going to give you a gold star for that. Anyway, she says that her whole life she'd really been into heavy metal music and there weren't a lot of Black female artists in that genre. And so it was sort of like, how do I get into it? But then she just decided that she had to because, she had met Keanu Reeves when she had gotten into the Matrix franchise. She'd lost out on a part of being a lead in that movie, but later on, she was written into the franchise. And through that, she met Keanu Reeves, who told her, hey, you should start your own band if you want one, because he had his own. And so she's like, well, if he can, I guess I can. So she gets together a bunch of Black musicians who are interested in the same genre as she is, and they start rocking out. She says that, I'm really skipping over some stuff here, and you know what's crazy is that I have not skipped over anything that was important. And yet I have just passed over like 75 pages. And I have told you everything that was interesting in those 75 pages. And that took me 10 minutes? I mean, that's what I'm telling you. When I tell you that this book is as dull as dirt, it's as dull as dirt. It's just unbelievable that they could fit this many words in and say nothing. Not one thing have they said thus far. Half this chapter is all about how she finally decided that heavy metal was going to be her bread and butter as far as what her band decided to do. After talking to Keanu Reeves and deciding that her future was now in heavy metal, because see, Hollywood was always trying to keep her in that gilded cage, and she needed a place to really rock out because, you know, they were always like slapping her on the wrist for doing things like auditioning with one hairstyle and then coming back to make the movie and looking completely fashionably different, you know, and they were always like coming after her for things like that, you know, because they couldn't just let her be, you know, and it was just really tiresome having to always deal with people who always had an attitude with you, you know. It didn't matter that she'd come in looking one way for that audition and then completely and physically changed when it was time to make the movie, and that kind of upset the director. I mean, he should have just been, you know, cool with it. I mean, she did look really sexy and hot now, so what was his problem? You know, what was his problem that her entire aesthetic had changed and that they had hired her with one aesthetic and now she had a different one? You know, I mean, like, what's the problem here? You know, so she really needed to find a way for that wild banshee to scream because Hollywood was always trying to put a wet blanket on her. Anyway, she decides to do that by, you know, getting the band together. And she wants you to know that the name of this band was just inspired. When we got started, it didn't take long for me to come up with Wicked Wisdom as the band's name. Wicked was a salute to my West Indian roots, meaning dope, excellent, or even unusual. And wisdom was a state one attained when the deepest truths had been absorbed and practiced. I didn't know any of us needed a clarification on either one of those words. Anyway, she says songs poured out from the pit of my heart in bowels, as if they'd been waiting there for years, screaming to be heard. Titles, lyrics, and melodies came to me effortlessly and filled up notebooks, scraps of paper, and even napkins. Napkins, you guys. Because that's when you know somebody's a true artist, when they can't stop drawing on the napkins. You know, have you ever heard a story about anybody who was artsy at all who didn't have a story about a napkin? You have to have that. You have to. You're not a true tortured artist if you aren't scribbling on napkins. So, and she was, so she is. Also, you should know that these songs did not just come from her heart, but also her bowels. And if you need to test that out, you should listen to some of that music because you can really sense the diarrhea. Now, she says that in the beginning they had kind of an R&B flavor, but they soon tuned that out. And as they played longer together, she and these band members that she, you know, gathered up, I'm not really sure how they came to her, they began to push for an edgier, full metal sound. Now, she says that she couldn't really get her current manager to help her because he didn't really know anything about the music scene, so he, you know, introduced her to this other guy named Dennis, and Dennis was all about booking her at places that you've never even heard of. But, you know, it's all about getting out there and just performing, and that's what she did. You know, she couldn't be picky about the venue because she just had to take what she could get. And it sounds like she was really getting some grody, nasty places. But shockingly, despite all odds, even though she had spent most of the beginning of her career as a heavy metal artist at dive bars and shacks in the middle of the woods, literally, somehow she manages to open up for Britney Spears' Onyx tour all over Europe. How? Why would you open a little pop princess tour with a heavy metal band that no one's ever heard of? It's a weird choice, and music critics were puzzled. And reviewers got the old school rock and soul part, but they didn't understand why we were opening for the reigning princess of pop. Yeah, so a lot of questions there. And I think the thing is that people just really weren't willing to give her the time of day. It was weird for people to see Jada Pinkett Smith, who had previously been an actress, to now be like doing heavy metal. It was just such a divergence, such a weird pivot that I think people really did struggle with seeing, like, understanding if she was sincere or if this was just like something to do because maybe her movie career had slowed down. Anyway, she goes on to tell about how being on tour meant that she got to see all kinds of being on tour meant she got to experience all parts of the US that she never would have previously. And she said that one time she went to Paris, Texas, and they were literally in a shack in the middle of a cornfield. But those white kids came to rock. And, you know, don't go away from this story without realizing that they were all about the mosh pits because they were super into the music that was happening on stage. And that there was this like beautiful moment in which white people and black people could commune together over the beauty that is a growling singer. So then she goes on for some pages about what she learned about white trash and, you know, the underbelly of white America. I really struggled to connect with anything she was saying there, so we'll let that go. But I'm not saying that she came away from those experiences with nothing to say. I'm just saying I don't think this was the book to spend pages on it, giving some, you know, broad brush strokes about white trash, as she would refer to it. And I just think that it just comes as like trying to intellectualize a thing when I'm like, why don't we just stick to you talking about your band? You know, because this seems like the topic for a different book, a different time. And it also feels like you have some maybe half-baked ideas, but like this would probably be interesting in a bigger discussion, but it's sort of a distraction from the topic at hand. Okay. She says that she did get invited to Ozfest by Sharon Osbourne, who was the one auditioning talent. And it was a colossal outrage to many people in that community. They just could not understand why in the world Jada Pinkett Smith's band had been offered a slot in that festival. She received an enormous amount of death threats. People were outraged on the websites. People were threatening her to such an extent that she considered at the time not doing it. Now, she says that she went ahead and did it because that was a time when black people weren't being tormented. But now, because black people are often tormented, she couldn't do it now. But that was a day in which she still believed that we could all get along. And so she says that even though she was getting threats like, we are going to stomp her, rape her, cut her head off, and put her naked body in a ditch, she still decided that this was a thing she wanted to do and take her kids on tour with her. Because her kids had gone on tour with her this entire time. You know, she wasn't going to stop now that people were saying they wanted to cut her head off and throw her body in a ditch. You know, why wouldn't you bring your young children to an arena like that? Anyway, she says that she did the tour. It was, you know, kind of sketchy when a gang of neo-Nazis showed up. That was weird, especially when they started throwing up the Heil Hitler salute. Definitely a negative. But then she had this guy, JC, who was in charge of her security, and JC, you know, just rushed straight off the stage into the mosh pit. And he told those neo-Nazis what's up, and then they just cowered and slunk away like dogs with their tails between their legs. And as it turns out, neo-Nazis are actually a bunch of cowards that wouldn't actually do anything. You just have to learn to stand up to the bully. So just in case you ever run into a neo-Nazi, just stand up really tall and tell them to shut the F up. So then she goes on to say that she got really sick on the tour. She was drained and tired and couldn't seem to put one foot in front of the other. She calls in a doctor at one point because she's like, I'm so sick, I don't know what to do. All of her lymph nodes in her entire body are swollen, and they drained the liquid out of one lymph node because they were like, hey, we have to find out if this is cancer. Like, she called the doctor in. He did her the once over and sent her immediately to the emergency room because he's like, something's really wrong with you. They drain the lymph node, find out it's not cancerous, but she's under an enormous amount of stress, and so her body is reacting in this way. The doctor says, you need to quit the tour now. This is not for you. And she feels so sick and tired that she's like, absolutely. I mean, thank God. You know, I've got a legitimate reason to leave this tour. And it was very stressful having people constantly putting death threats in about you. And, you know, the neo-Nazis had kind of quit showing up, but that initial thing had been kind of stressful, obviously. But then, in a mysterious passage, Will sits her down and is like, I don't care if I have to send an ambulance with you to every single place this tour stops. You're going to finish this tour. I don't care if you need medical treatment before and after every time you're on stage. You're going to finish. People are trying to get you to quit. You are not going to quit. And people have paid to see you, and you are not going to disappoint them. So I don't care if your health's online. You are going to finish what you start. That's what we do in the Smith family. We finish what we start. And so she agrees with him and finishes the tour. Okay. I can't decide if I think that was good advice or not. Like, I feel like that would have been a way better example of feeling like he didn't care about my well-being than the story about the pest control guy got mouthy with me and then I threatened him with a blender. I feel like if I felt like my husband didn't have my back, That would be a better example where the doctor literally told me you could get seriously, seriously sick if you keep touring. And your husband's like, I don't care if you need medical treatment before and after and have to send an ambulance around after you. You're going to get up there and perform anyway. Like, I think that might be a better example of feeling like your spouse maybe wasn't 100% with you. Okay, we got to really speed this up. As it turns out, she was invited to open for Guns N' Roses, but then decided not to do it after all because Jaden was starting his film career with his dad. He was going to be in The Pursuit of Happiness playing Will's son. So she needed to be there by his side because Will was not going to be able to be present for his son on that set because it was such an emotionally draining role. The boy was going to need some kind of other parental figure there. And so she didn't go on tour. I celebrate that decision. I think that, you know, her kids had gone on tour with her everywhere she'd ever gone, and she says the same, that it wasn't too much to stop what she was doing to support her child. So, you know, that's good. And in the interim, the band kind of broke up. So, I mean, did anybody think that she was going to become super famous doing it? It seems like it was kind of a pet project, honestly. Okay. Now we come to the part where I was just over it. I mean, I was over it like so profoundly and so inexplicably that I hardly have words for how annoyed I was that I'd read this far and gained so little. But I do want to talk about the fact that the red table talk really, I think, is what propelled her towards a enormous amount of resentment for Will. So I just like full on skipped several chapters because I just couldn't even. I mean, I don't need to hear all of her feelings about like what COVID was like and all this. Like, I don't even care. I cannot hear another word about COVID. But in the chapters that I skimmed over, what has become incredibly apparent is she and Will are no longer married in any conceivable way. They are not divorced, but they've been living their own separate lives for a good minute now. Now, you'll remember they did not have a prenup, and they didn't have a prenup because they didn't want to get divorced. So not having a prenup essentially said, for no reason can we ever part ways. But that didn't mean they couldn't live individual lives and be separated. So she goes on in those chapters, I'm assuming, to discuss that. I honestly didn't read those. I was just like, all right, let's just move on here. I mean, okay, all right, already. So I skipped on to Red Table Talk, where she like, the book goes on and on and on about how she came to have this show. I don't care. All I care about is how she and Will ended up having a conversation that was so wild and weird that we're still talking about it to this day. Now, she says that Will had been out of her life for 4 solid years, living his own life, doing his own thing. And the arrangement they had in their marriage was, look, if you need to step out, look, we don't have an open marriage. You don't get to be with who you want whenever, and I don't get to be with whoever I want whenever. But, I mean, I can't fulfill you all the time. And there's going to be a lot of people throwing themselves at you, you know, because you're Will Smith or because you're Jada. So if you feel like temptation is just too real, and also this person seems like they could maybe fulfill something for you that I currently can't, I will give you a pass to go be with that person, but only in this circumstance, and you have to let me know beforehand that that's happening. So that's their weird mental gymnastics for how they're going to get through cheating on each other, but still staying married. Apparently Will had been doing this for some time, you know, living his own thing. And so she had used this as an opportunity to find herself in the arms of a family friend. Now, this guy, August, had been a family friend. He had come to, it seems like they're constantly trying to help everyone in their community. So if somebody has mental anguish, physical anguish, whatever, legal problems, they are quickly want to rush in and be the one to help. Just sounds really good. But I mean, I don't know how that really worked out. I mean, this is a story that tells us how that really worked out, because he ends up becoming friends with them. He was kind of more the age of the kids, a little bit older than Jaden, but definitely more in their generation than in Jada or Will's. Anyway, throughout that friendship, they get close enough that they end up having an affair. Now, she says that it had broken up like multiple years before the Red Table Talk, but it had come back up again. I guess the guy she'd had the affair with was coming out doing some talking, and so she felt like she had to address it. and she was going to address it on Red Table Talk, and she had told Will she was going to. And Will said, yeah, I'd like to join that conversation. They wanted to come out and show a united front. They were not willing to tell the world that they were necessarily separated and had been for years, but they wanted to come out and talk about the strength of a relationship, understanding each other, not going after each other, not being each other's worst enemy in the face of poor decisions, or even decisions that they had made agreeing together, but that maybe didn't have the outcome they wanted. Basically, the whole point of this Red Table Talk was supposed to be, I have your back and you have mine. But it didn't go the way Jada had expected. She says that the timing for the shoot was not optimal. They'd already taken the whole set down. They weren't planning on doing this segment or this episode. But because of the news, she felt like she needed to get on top of the story first. So they kind of threw the set back up. Will had expressed a desire to be on that set. So the timing was not optimal. And so she says maybe that's why the conversation went off the rails. I'm like, no, the conversation went off the rails because this is a super jacked up situation in which both of you are potentially not being honest here. She says, once the conversation finally started, now very late at night, we began with ease, but midway through the table talk, I could feel the conversation beginning to turn. Although at this point, Will had been free as a bird for the last 4 years, living his life on his own terms, he seemed to convey that he had been done wrong. At my reference to having had a, quote, entanglement, he sternly reframed it with a laugh as a relationship. This came across as if this had all been a secret to him, when that wasn't true, and that he had somehow found out about my relationship as if I had not told him about it. Now, she claims that she had disclosed this relationship to him when it was happening, and that there wasn't anything that he didn't know about. And the only reason they were coming up and talking about it now wasn't because he had just found out about it, but because the world was finding out about it, and they had to let everyone know, hey, we're still good. We're still a couple. You know, this isn't like destroyed us or anything like that. We are still as strong as ever. What I think is interesting, though, is that she used language that showed her shame. Like, if everything was on the up and up and she'd had every right to be with August and that nobody should have questioned why she did that, why did she use the word entanglement? If Will had been free as a bird to do as he wanted, and that meant that then she too was as free as a bird to do anything, and that they had both enclosed this information, why was she hedging around the topic, calling it an entanglement? Nobody would call it an entanglement if it was a relationship that everybody knew about and was okay with. And so for Will to correct that language and say, no, it was a relationship, it's her own guilty conscience that's saying he tried to throw me under the bus and act like he didn't know. No, he's giving you the authority to call it what it was because that's what you both knew it to be at the time when it had happened. You know, if everything had been on the up and up, why did she act so weird and defensive in that conversation if everyone was living their best life and everyone had been allowed to, you know? So I don't buy this reframing of what happened here. You know, I think he didn't know that it had happened. I think she was ashamed of what had happened. I think he had come to find out some things had been going on. Or even if he was free as a bird to do whatever, according to the decisions that they as a couple of married people had made in that, you can do your thing and I can do mine, but we have to tell each other we're doing it. I think maybe she didn't disclose what she was doing, thinking, well, he's doing whatever. I don't answer to him anymore. Regardless, she says that she failed herself here because she didn't stand up for herself and call him out. And I'm like, why didn't you though? You know, it's like here, this whole book, she wants you to know that she's a super strong-willed person, rough around the edges. She always told people how it was, to the point where Warren Beatty at one point had to take her aside and be like, hey, maybe you need to calm down because you're off-putting, right? She's told us story upon story upon story in which she just went through life and just was like a bull in a china shop, but it all worked out for her. Why now she's sitting in front of Will, he's openly disagreeing with her timeline, and she allows him to plow her under for the sake of what? His dignity? When has she ever cared about that? So she says, I don't know why, but I just, went into self-sabotage mode like I always do. And I'm like, according to which story in this book have you gone into self-sabotage mode ever? You always tell us about how you went through life doing what you wanted, but it all worked out in the end because you ultimately had more wisdom than anybody else in that scenario. Anyway, she says that after a few more failed attempts at regaining the narrative, I resigned and abandoned the purpose of why I had come to the table in the first place, to tell my truth and to show how we were in partnership in working through being separated, but not divorced. She says, of course, I did what I was trying never to do again, that is, fall right into my martyrdom bag. It was clear that Will and I were no longer in alignment, but the train had gone off the track. Because I didn't want to oppose Will publicly in my codependent way, I took the blame, and I played the pleasing and appeasing role that I knew so well. This trauma reaction was an old friend I thought I'd kicked to the curb, but clearly it could still be activated when I was in fear of being abandoned or not feeling protected. Okay, what is she even talking about? Nothing in that scenario made it seem like she was the supplicant who was sorry for what she had done, and nothing in that interaction made it seem like she was being subservient to Will's feelings. She was defiant, she was passive aggressive, she was clearly agitated at him for making her reframe the conversation in a more truthful way. She can say all she wants that she sat there and didn't oppose him publicly. Everything about her demeanor opposed him publicly. Behavior is a language, as we all know. And her behavior in that seat said, I am not sorry for what I did. I am going to make you sorry. I'm going to make you pay for the way that you're acting right now. I am going to sit here and act like the regal queen that I am. I'm going to make it seem like you're the one off the rails for calling me out on this, when I am only walking through this in the enlightened way that I have learned to. I am the queen here. I am the heroine on her journey, and you are acting like the stodgy male who wants to muck it up for me because you want to be part of the patriarchy. But I'm not going to get down in the dirt with you on this one. So I'm going to sit here and be condescending in my demeanor to you and smile my secret and quiet smile of condescension. But you're the one in the wrong. And yet, when she tries to tell us about what happened, even though we saw all of that, in her retelling of it, she acts like she was like this poor, like, put upon victim, like, okay, I'm sorry, okay, I didn't mean to, like, it's not what I meant, like, don't be mad at me. Like, that's what she wants us to believe she did. No, she didn't. Anyway, then she ends the whole thing with this incredibly weird jab that is like very, very, very petty. And she says, I wonder if Will was feeling the same way. It was hard to tell with him sitting there with his tired, watery, weepy eyes. To be fair, Will's eyes water all the time. And it was very late. I'm not even really sure what she's talking about. Did he feel the same way? The same way what? That he was like being put upon? That he was being lied to? That he was being abused? Like that someone was abusing the truth? Probably, because you were lying to him. You were abusing the truth. You were trying to steer the conversation in a way that made you look like you hadn't made a mistake. If his eyes were tired, watery, and weepy, it's probably because it was super late. You're talking about things that are incredibly personal, and you're, forcing him to swallow this bitter medicine and do it with a smile. Of course, he looked unbelievably upset during that conversation. It was an upsetting conversation. Okay, but to continue on, she says that things really began to get ugly when Will jokingly referred to himself as the man who stood by his woman on the steps of the courthouse after she was tarnished by her, quote, transgressions. I understood that the situation was humiliating for him, and that was never my intention. Well, then why are you publicly talking about a situation in which the world, you don't have to answer to the world. If August wants to write music in which he's talking about you and he and all this, you lie to yourself by saying, I now have to go out and I have to talk about this. No, you don't. That can be that guy's topic of conversation. If you value the relationship that you have with your husband, then just shepherd that relationship and make sure that it's taken care of. You don't owe the public any explanation for if you stepped out or you didn't. That's your own business. Anyway, she says that Will managed to inject humor into the conversation enough so that by the end, we could fist bump to our slogan, we ride together, we die together, bad marriage for life. It said so much when at the very end, Will got in the final stinger. Laughing, but truly serious, he proclaimed that we were okay. But with the caveat, I'm gonna get you back first. Laughing but serious myself, I interrupted with a rebuttal of, you gonna get me back? I think you've got me back. We're good on that. In that moment, at least, my voice returned as I took a more honest stand on my own behalf, knowing all that had transpired between us. When the time came to post conversation, I could have decided against it. Many implored me not to put it out. Miguel simply said, "You're giving the message that it's all you, and that's not true. You're going to take a big hit for this." She says that she said, "It's my mess, I'll take the hit." Others on the team suggested that she sit on the video for a bit and maybe return to the table alone as she'd originally intended to do. Yeah, so she could have told the story the way she wanted to tell it without anybody objecting to what she was saying. That would have been super disingenuous. And I think that if she was going to talk about it at all, it was better to talk about it with Will. Even though it was a catastrophe, at least it was an honest conversation to some degree. But if she had sat there and told us a story on her own, nobody would have believed any of the things that she said. At least with this, we got an interaction that was interesting and didn't just feel like some kind of political spin on an affair. But this chapter ends with a crazy dream that she had. And I'm going to read that to you because I think that if this is how she internally feels about Will, then it is no wonder the man has been destroyed. That his former glories of the 90s and early 2000s have come to naught if this is your partner in life and this is how she feels about you. Oh, I had to laugh after a prophetic dream I had in this time period. In it, I was attending a function and no one would speak to me. I'd walk up to people I knew and they'd act like I was a stranger. In the dream, I called Will and said, "Why did you do this to me? Why would you ever do that to me?" While I continued to rant, Will waited patiently and finally replied, "The bigger question is, why would you do that to yourself? It's your show. You didn't have to put it out." What did he say? All of a sudden, my arms bulged into huge muscles and my entire body burst into the form of a grotesque werewolf, and I snatched Will by the top of his head through the phone receiver and delivered us both into a setting of a dark forest under a full moon. As a gray, grotesque werewolf, I stood over him at 10 feet tall, panting and salivating and staring down at him. He started to speak, and within seconds my claws ripped him to shreds, and then I devoured him. I howled to the moon with blood dripping from my jaws, and then I looked to the ground and found the one thing that was left of him. A bloody, severed index finger. I took my grotesque werewolf foot and kicked his index finger over a canyon through the moonlit sky. I abruptly woke up. At first startled, I had to ask, what the hell was that? And then I had to chuckle. Why did I have to kick his finger over the canyon like that? So funny. That is so profoundly wild. Look, I am sort of a believer that dreams can expose quite a bit that's going on in our hearts and minds. I'm not saying that we need to pay an enormous amount of attention to them on the regular, but if you're having a dream like that in which your husband comes to you and says the problems that you have are your own, and then you devour him as a werewolf and rip him to shreds and eat him and then kick what remaining body parts you find over a canyon, I'd say that that dream is pretty indicative of a chaotic inner life. Okay, and now let's finish this up, shall we? We've only spent an entire hour on this trash already, but I want to talk about the Slap Heard Around the World. I'm not even going to use the book to tell you about it. I'll just tell you what she said. She says that there was a whole lot that went on behind the scenes that you are not privy to, and she just doesn't have the time to say it. But you should know that she didn't actually think that Will had hit Chris. She thought that it was like some kind of bit that they were going to do. And, you know, it totally hurt her feelings when he came after her about her bald head, but not for her, for all the people who suffer from alopecia, because by the way, she'd been suffering for it from some time. Now, she hadn't bothered to tell anybody about it, and she'd chosen to shave her head because it was an agreement between her and God that if he chose not to have her hair grow back, she was good with that. And so, even though her hair was growing back sometimes and sometimes it wasn't, she just started taking to shaving her head because, you know, she was showing submission to God. Now, nobody really knew she had alopecia, and of course it doesn't really look like she has alopecia because there doesn't seem to be any apparent bald spots on her head. It looks always like she's just cut it short. So you might not realize she has alopecia, but she does. So note that. So for him to come after her like that was a low blow, but I mean, he'd been giving low blows to her for a while now. Now, she would also like you to know that there's like big time beef between her and Chris and have been since the 90s, but again, can't get into it. Now, when it happened, she and Will were not together. In fact, she wasn't even planning on going to that awards show with him. But then he extended the hand of friendship to her and was like, hey, why don't you go? And so she was like, okay, fine, I will. So she goes to the award ceremony. Chris makes his joke. She rolls her eyes because she's like so over it with him. Like, of course he had to go there, you know. But, you know, it wasn't like a big eye roll. It wasn't like a big deal or anything. And it definitely wasn't a dog whistle to Will to get up and start doing something. He did that of his own volition. And, you know, she thought it was a joke. But then when he came in, sat back down and then started screaming about, you know, keep my wife's name out of your mouth, then she started to realize that something might not be right here. Now, she never really knew why Will did it. That's never become clear to her. There was a lot of people there and nobody told them to leave, so that's why they just didn't leave. But there was also a lot of people there who came and consoled her and like asked her if she was okay, and she like just really honestly didn't know if she was okay. Basically, what it showed her was that Will was just going through a really hard time and that she was just gonna have to learn to love him through it. And she wasn't really sure what the hard time was, but you know, again, they're ride or die. So Will's going through a thing. It just made her love him all the more because he was showing himself to be a human. You know, before she wanted to tear him up and eat him like a werewolf, but now that she saw that he was broken and but a shadow of a man, she could learn to love him again. She says, the holy slap taught me the importance of learning to love Will and his shadow, how to continue to love myself through so much misunderstanding and vitriol, and how to love you, dearest reader, no matter what your thoughts may be concerning me, Will, our family, our marriage, or the holy slap. You have a right to think it all, and I will love you anyway, because you are lovable and worthy too, by the decree of the divine. Blessed be, so it is, thy will be done. I find it super scary when people say thy will be done, when they say it outside the context of the Lord's Prayer, because God forbid people's will be done. People's will is crooked and perverse the majority of the time. Anyway, that's the end of the book. I should have read that one first before deciding it was something I could even begin to talk about. It was, by and large, the worst. But you know what? Now that we're done, we can move on to Brittany. And we are moving on to Brittany's book. You guys, I got a lot of votes about Endgame. But I would say that it was like, if I had to give it a percentage, I'd say 15% people wanted Endgame, 85% of people wanted Brittany. Thank God for that. That Endgame foolishness, I cannot even. Maybe I will visit it when I have nothing else to talk about. Like if we're like on a low ebb, there's like no books coming out, but there's so many right now that I have to cover that I just don't have time to cover some trash. You know, we got to do Brittany. I wanted to do Matthew Perry's book. And, you know, when we're done with Trader King, I really want to do a book about Diana. And so there's just too many things that I really want to do that I don't have time to do something I don't even want to do. So anyway, praise be that we're done with Worthy. Praise be. I cannot even believe that we did that much and that we spent that much time talking about this book. And I just cannot believe that a book could be 400 pages and still say nothing. So, you know, I'm shocked, but we finished it. We said we did it. We're done. Good for us. Gold star, gold star, gold star. Meet me again later this week. Later we will be doing our chapter of Trader King. I'm all jacked up on my schedule with Trader King, but hopefully I can sort things out now. It's just crazy with the holidays and all. But anyway, very soon, I'm going to try to get that out tomorrow, our chapter of Trader King. But I had to get this out because I just want to be done with it so I can start the Brittany book. All right, I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.